I've been closely following the political landscape for many years, and I can say with absolute certainty that the recent events involving President Trump and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar are far more than just another fleeting political spat. This is a pivotal moment that has the potential to fundamentally reshape our understanding of loyalty, citizenship, and what it truly means to be an American. The implications are truly staggering. Let me provide some context for those who may have missed the initial events. Omar made the controversial decision to publicly mock the death of a prominent figure, Kirk, while his family was still grieving. This was not a mere policy disagreement or partisan battle. It crossed a line into something much darker. Americans from all walks of life, regardless of their political affiliations, reacted with a visceral and overwhelming sense of outrage. There are certain lines that simply should not be crossed, and using someone's death for political gain was seen by many as a grave violation of basic human decency. The public response was swift and unified, with calls for Omar's deportation cutting across party lines. This was not just conservatives angry at liberals or Republicans lashing out at Democrats. This was Americans from all corners of the political spectrum coming together to say, no, you don't celebrate death. You don't disrespect a man's legacy while his family is still mourning. This is where President Trump's political acumen truly shines. Most politicians would have issued a standard condemnation, perhaps called for an apology, and then moved on. But Trump recognized that this was a golden opportunity to reframe the entire debate around American values. When he responded, he didn't just defend conservatives or attack Omar's character. No, he did something far more strategic and impactful. I've always been fascinated by the intricacies of the political landscape, and the recent exchange between President Trump and Congresswoman Omar is a prime example of the strategic brilliance that can unfold in the public arena. When Trump addressed Omar's criticisms of America, he didn't simply defend conservatives. He masterfully shifted the narrative to a much broader question of loyalty and belonging. By highlighting the stark contrast between the failed state of Somalia, Omar's country of origin, and the opportunities America has afforded her, Trump challenged the very foundation of Omar's moral authority to lecture this nation. But Trump's response went beyond mere words. By bringing up the long-standing allegations and questions surrounding Omar's past, including the rumors of immigration fraud, he forced a conversation into the mainstream that the media had previously tried to bury. These whispers in Washington circles suddenly couldn't be ignored, as the president himself had thrust them into the public spotlight for all to see. What's fascinating from a political science perspective is the way Trump's actions have reframed the debate. Omar's confident declaration about the impossibility of deporting an American citizen may not be entirely accurate, and this revelation has the potential to open up a much deeper discussion about the complex issues of citizenship, immigration, and the responsibilities that come with the privileges of living in this country. As I reflect on this exchange, I can't help but admire the strategic brilliance of Trump's response. He didn't just defend his political allies. He used the moment to challenge the very foundations of Omar's arguments, forcing a reckoning with long-simmering questions and allegations that had previously been dismissed as mere conspiracy theories. This is the kind of political maneuvering that captivates me, and I believe it will have far-reaching implications for the ongoing debates surrounding loyalty, belonging, and the true meaning of American citizenship. I've been around long enough to know that when someone starts calling their opponents names instead of addressing the substance, they've lost the argument. And that's exactly what happened with Omar's response to Trump's message. The optics were devastating for her. When she appeared on CNN, she looked nothing like the confident, progressive firebrand her supporters were used to seeing. Instead, she appeared nervous, defensive, almost panicked. When pressed about that Frankenstein post she shared, she tried to deflect, saying she didn't have to agree with every word. But the problem is, the Frankenstein comparison wasn't buried in fine print. It was the entire point of the post. And when the pressure intensified, she resorted to name-calling, dismissing her critics as idiots. That's a clear sign that she's lost the argument. Americans can smell fear, and that's exactly what came through in her response. What's even more telling is the silence from Omar's usual allies. When others like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders get attacked, you typically see statements of support, fundraising appeals, the whole progressive machine springs into action. But with Omar, there was a deafening silence. It's as if even her own side knew she was in over her head on this one. Technically, Trump may be right that it's extremely rare for someone to lose their citizenship. But there are things like denaturalization that can strip citizenship from those who lied on their applications, committed marriage fraud, or concealed key facts. And if someone commits treason, terrorism, or certain high crimes, they can lose their citizenship too. This might remind some of us of the Cold War era, when loyalty tests were part of American life, and questions about allegiance weren't considered controversial, but necessary. There was an understanding then that citizenship came with responsibilities, not just rights. And I think that memory buried deep in the American consciousness is part of why Trump's message resonated so powerfully with older Americans. Suddenly, Omar wasn't untouchable anymore. She was forced into defense mode, and it showed. The progressive machine that usually rallies to her defense was nowhere to be found. It's as if even her own side knew she was in over her head on this one. I've been closely following the situation surrounding Congresswoman Omar's recent comments, and I have to say, the implications of this moment go far beyond just one individual. What we're really witnessing is a clash of two fundamentally different visions for the future of America. On one side, you have Omar and her brand of multicultural progressivism, ACN, a worldview that is often quick to criticize and condemn, even when it comes to issues of national importance and reverence for the fallen. Her dismissive tweets about the 9/11 attacks and her apparent lack of empathy for the victims and their families were deeply troubling. In stark contrast, you had President Trump and other conservative leaders standing shoulder to shoulder with the grieving families, honoring the memory of those who lost their lives. The visual of that powerful moment, of Americans coming together in a spirit of unity and respect, spoke volumes. It highlighted the stark divide between those who seek to divide us along ideological lines and those who believe in the unifying principles that have long defined this nation. And the consequences of that divide were on full display when an armed individual impersonating law enforcement showed up near the memorial service. That's the kind of chaos and danger that can arise when reckless rhetoric is allowed to take hold. Words have power, and when leaders choose cruelty over decency, they create an environment where anything becomes acceptable. This isn't just about one congresswoman and her controversial comments. It's about the very soul of America and that one, the direction we choose to take as a country. Do we embrace the divisive, cynical worldview of those who seem to take pleasure in mocking the dead and undermining our shared values? Or do we reaffirm our commitment to the ideals of unity, respect, and reverence for the sacrifices that have made this nation great? The choice, my friends, is ours to make, and the stakes have never been higher. I've seen firsthand how the divisive rhetoric and political grandstanding can have real-world consequences. As someone who has been in the public eye for years, I understand the power of words and the responsibility that comes with having a platform. When I look at the current state of American politics, I'm deeply concerned by the growing divide and the lack of nuance in the discourse. On one side, you have figures like Congresswoman Omar, who have made a name for themselves by challenging the status quo and giving voice to the marginalized. To her supporters, she represents progress and a vision for a more inclusive future. But to her critics, she embodies everything that's wrong with modern politics: the tendency to prioritize grievance over pragmatism, to see the world through the lens of oppression rather than shared values. On the other hand, you have figures like President Trump, who have tapped into a deep well of populist sentiment and nationalist fervor. Trump's message of America first and his unapologetic defense of the country's history and traditions resonate with those who feel that the country has lost its way. For those who lived through the defining struggles of the 20th century, Trump's rhetoric probably feels like a return to a time when loyalty and unity weren't just empty slogans, but the very fabric of what it meant to be an American. But as I've seen, this kind of polarized rhetoric can have dangerous consequences. When political leaders prioritize outrage and shock value over thoughtful discourse, they create an environment where anything feels justified, even violence. We saw this play out in the tragic incident at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, where an armed individual impersonating law enforcement conducted unauthorized security sweeps, sowing fear and chaos among the grieving families. This is the heart of the problem. When we allow our politics to devolve into a cycle of outrage and recrimination, we risk losing sight of the common values and shared identity that have always been the bedrock of this nation. And that's why I believe it's so important for those of us with platforms and influence to use our voices responsibly, to call for unity and understanding, even in the face of deep political divisions. I've observed how the political landscape has evolved, where controversy and outrage often take precedence over substantive discourse. Politicians seem to compete in a race to make the most shocking statements, as they've learned that this translates into attention and, ultimately, power. But this path leads to a concerning destination, and it's crucial for every leader to understand the delicate balance between free speech and responsible speech. While Omar has the right to express her views, regardless of how misguided or insensitive they may be, true leaders are expected to exercise discretion and restraint. They should prioritize the greater good, fostering unity over division and upholding decency above partisan politics. In this regard, I believe Trump demonstrated a remarkable display of leadership by standing with Kirk's family, reframing the debate around loyalty and civility, and reminding Americans of the values we once shared. This moment holds profound implications for the future. I've learned that character scandals tend to have a far more lasting impact than policy-related controversies. You can weather a bad vote on a spending bill or spin a contentious position on taxes or regulations, but when the public perceives a lack of basic human decency, it becomes an anchor that is nearly impossible to shake off. Every opponent Omar faces will undoubtedly bring up her callous remarks about a grieving family, and this will be a liability that could prove career-ending. But Trump's response went even deeper. By connecting Omar's controversial comments to questions about her immigration history, he managed to shift the national conversation in a remarkable way. This was a masterful display of political jiu-jitsu, using his opponent's momentum against them to achieve a much broader objective. Suddenly, millions of Americans were questioning not just the appropriateness of Omar's remarks, but her very right to be in the country in the first place. As an observer of human behavior, I recognized the profound impact that this incident could have on the political landscape. Character and values have become increasingly important in the eyes of the electorate, and those who are perceived as lacking in basic decency and respect may find themselves facing an uphill battle that could prove insurmountable. The implications of this moment extend far beyond the immediate controversy, and I believe it will continue to reverberate in the political arena for years to come. I've been closely following the developments surrounding Congresswoman Omar and the recent controversy surrounding her comments. As someone who has been in the public eye for many years, I understand the weight and responsibility that comes with holding a position of power and influence. What's truly concerning to me is not just the specific remarks made by Omar, but the broader implications for the state of our political discourse and the values we're upholding as a nation. When trust is broken at a fundamental level, it's incredibly difficult to regain, and that's exactly what we're seeing play out here. Omar has gone from being a progressive icon to someone even her own party is starting to view as a liability. The whispers of primary challenges, the silence from her usual allies, and the hesitation from donors, it all paints a clear picture of the precarious position she finds herself in. But this isn't just about Omar. It's about the direction our politics is headed and the kind of country we're leaving for future generations. Do we reward politicians who choose cruelty over decency? Do we normalize the mockery of death and the celebration of division? Or do we demand something better from our leaders? I firmly believe that with great power comes great responsibility. Representing the American people should mean embodying American values, values of compassion, unity, and a deep respect for the sanctity of human life. When we lose sight of those core principles, we risk creating a system where outrage is rewarded over decency and division becomes more profitable than unity. The danger here is not just the individual actions of politicians like Omar, but the potential for this kind of behavior to become normalized. We've seen the societal breakdown that can occur when shared values disappear and common purpose evaporates. And I fear that's the path we're on if we don't course correct. Look at what happened during the memorial service for the fallen hero. Tens of thousands of Americans came together to honor his life, to comfort his family, and to demonstrate that decency still matters in this country. That's the America I remember, a nation where leaders understood the weight of their words and the importance of serving something bigger than themselves. It's up to your generation to reclaim that vision, to demand that our elected officials embody the values that have made this country great. You have the historical perspective to recognize what we're losing and the moral authority to insist that we get it back. The future of our nation depends on it. I've always believed that the true measure of a leader is not how they handle the easy times, but how they respond in the face of adversity. And in the aftermath of the tragic events that unfolded, I couldn't help but be struck by the stark contrast between the actions of President Trump and Congresswoman Omar. While thousands gathered to mourn the loss of life and show their respect, Omar chose to retreat from the moment, posting cruel memes rather than joining in the collective act of remembrance. In stark contrast, President Trump demonstrated the very essence of American values, any teen, honoring the dead, comforting the grieving, and standing firm in the face of those who would seek to divide us. This was not about partisan politics. It was about the kind of society we aspire to be. And in that moment, the American people spoke volumes, rejecting Omar's callous behavior and affirming their shared belief in the fundamental values that have long defined this great nation. It was a powerful reminder that despite the rancor and division that so often dominates our political discourse, there remains a deep well of common ground, a shared understanding that respect for the fallen, compassion for the bereaved, and a commitment to basic human decency are not the exclusive domain of any one political party, but the hallmarks of a truly great society. As I reflect on this episode, I am filled with a profound sense of optimism, for it shows that even in the darkest of times, the American spirit endures, a spirit that calls us to rise above the petty squabbles of the moment and to rededicate ourselves to the timeless principles that have always been the bedrock of our national identity. The choice before us is clear. Will we demand that our leaders embody these values, or will we continue to reward the politics of outrage and division? The answer, I believe, lies in the hands of the American people, in the votes we cast, the candidates we support, and the behaviors we choose to condemn or condone. For in the end, this is not just about the actions of any one individual, but about the very soul of our nation. And if we stay true to the best of who we are, I have no doubt that we can overcome the challenges that lie ahead and emerge stronger, more united, and more committed to the ideals that have always defined us as Americans. As someone who has been deeply involved in the world of technology and innovation, I've always believed that progress and change are essential for a society to thrive. However, the recent events surrounding the ongoing political discourse in the United States have given me pause to reflect on the deeper implications of the choices we make as a nation. The response to Congresswoman Omar's comments has revealed a troubling undercurrent in American politics, one that threatens to undermine the very foundations of our democratic system. While I understand the desire to hold our leaders accountable, the way in which this has been approached has been deeply concerning. It's not just about political point scoring or the volume of one's voice on social media. It's about upholding the values and principles that have made this country great. Leadership, in my view, is not about wielding power or commanding attention. It's about understanding the weight of one's words and actions and the responsibility that comes with representing the American people. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular, and showing up in times of crisis to support the grieving and defend the vulnerable. Unfortunately, what we've seen from the current administration has been a concerning departure from these ideals. The response to Congresswoman Omar's comments has not only failed to address the underlying issues, but has also served to further divide and polarize the nation. This is a dangerous path that, if left unchecked, could have irreversible consequences for the future of American politics and society. As a citizen and a leader in my own right, I believe it's our collective responsibility to demand more from our elected officials. We must hold them accountable, not just for their words, but for their actions and the impact they have on the lives of everyday Americans. We must also be willing to engage in difficult conversations, to listen to diverse perspectives, and to find common ground where it exists. The choice before us is clear. Do we continue down the path of outrage and division, or do we recommit ourselves to the values of respect, responsibility, and unity that have always been the bedrock of this great nation? The future of America depends on the decisions we make today, and I believe that the time to act is now, before the damage becomes irreversible.